What if I told you that during the most dangerous decade on Earth, Hollywood made films so terrifying about nuclear apocalypse that governments actually banned them? More shocking, one movie literally changed Ronald Reagan's mind about launching nuclear weapons. We're talking about the forbidden films of the 1980s that predicted we were heading straight toward World War III. Films so visceral that even advertisers refused to air them. So buckle up, because these aren't sanitized blockbusters. These are the cold, brutal, uncut visions of humanity's final days that powerful people didn't want you to see. And honestly, the predictions they made, terrifyingly accurate. Number 18. The Day After, 1983. ABC network executives were absolutely losing their minds trying to censor this film into oblivion. And over 100 million Americans tuned in to watch this nuclear nightmare unfold across their television screens on November 20th, 1983, and President Ronald Reagan himself was given a private screening days before airtime. Director Nicholas Meyer fought tooth and nail with the network's Standards and Practices Department, which wanted massive sections removed. They demanded he cut a scene of a child having nightmares about nuclear attack. They forced him to eliminate footage of radiation victims and hospital patients screaming. Meyer refused the worst demands, but still lost 8.5 minutes of footage deemed too graphic for broadcast. The network insisted on sanitizing the nuclear blast sequences, stripping away shots of human bodies carbonizing in the heat. Meyer's original vision was infinitely darker than what actually aired. But here's the shocker. Even the watered-down version absolutely devastated Reagan. His own biographer documented that the film sent him into an emotional tailspin. 1 week after viewing it, Reagan asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff if a scenario like this could actually happen. The general replied simply, "The problem is much worse than you think." That conversation directly led to Reagan signing the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, effectively ending the arms race. One movie, hundreds of millions of lives potentially saved. The irony? Most Americans had no idea how heavily the version they watched had been censored and edited down. The complete uncut version, showing all the graphic aftermath footage, has remained largely locked away in archives for decades. Number 17. Threads, 1984. The BBC created something so nightmarishly realistic that it was initially banned and heavily restricted in the United Kingdom. While American networks tried to soften the blow with melodrama, British filmmaker Mick Jackson and writer Barry Hines decided to strip away all emotional comfort. Threads follows the lead-up to nuclear war through the eyes of ordinary working-class residents in Sheffield, England. Director Jackson shot this during the peak of the nuclear freeze movement, capturing the absolute terror that permeated 1980s Britain. The film runs 112 minutes of relentless dread, building to a moment where Sheffield is vaporized in a blinding flash. What comes next is where Threads crosses into pure horror. The aftermath sequences don't show heroic survival or human spirit triumphing. Instead, they document the complete collapse of civilization with almost documentary-level realism. Radiation sickness spreads. Starvation becomes inevitable. The film then jumps forward years, showing survivors in a dystopian wasteland, their minds broken, their bodies failing. Viewers reported feeling physically ill after watching it. Families were traumatized. The BBC initially restricted viewings, warning audiences of psychological harm. Critics praised its unflinching commitment to scientific accuracy regarding nuclear winter effects. Threads demolished the American television movie formula by refusing to provide any redemptive arc. The film essentially argues that after nuclear war, there is no recovery. There is no hope, just slow, agonizing death. Decades later, it remains the most terrifying depiction of nuclear holocaust ever committed to film. Many viewers still claim it's the most disturbing thing they've ever watched. Number 16. When the Wind Blows, 1986. This one landed as an animated feature based on Raymond Briggs' acclaimed graphic novel, and it became one of the most emotionally devastating films ever made, regardless of its cartoon format. The story follows Jim and Hilda Bloggs, an elderly British couple living peacefully in their cottage. When news reports suggest nuclear war is coming, they follow government advice from the Protect and Survive pamphlet, making a pathetic fallout shelter out of doors and old books. Their innocence and faith in official guidance becomes absolutely crushing as the film progresses. The nuclear strike happens around the midpoint, and then When the Wind Blows becomes a meditation on death, aging, and humanity's powerlessness. With a voice acting from John Mills and Peggy Ashcroft, the Bloggs slowly succumb to radiation sickness, deteriorating as they desperately try to maintain normalcy and care for one another. The animation style is almost whimsical, which makes the deterioration even more grotesque. Critics praised how the charming art style directly contrasted with the horrendous content, creating cognitive dissonance elements that left viewers emotionally destroyed. Parents who brought their kids expecting a family-friendly animation were horrified. The psychedelic musical interludes interrupt the narrative's darkness, supposedly included as references to the Yellow Submarine, but they just heighten the surreal nightmare quality. By the film's conclusion, watching two beloved elderly characters die slow deaths while maintaining dignity is heartbreaking beyond description. Many viewers cite this as the most devastating film they've encountered. The combination of animation, elderly protagonists, classical voice acting, and slow deterioration created something that lingers in memory far longer than live-action horror. Number 15. Testament, 1983. Released just weeks before the day after, Testament takes a completely different approach to nuclear apocalypse. Instead of showing the immediate destruction, director Lynn Lippman focuses on a California suburb where a nuclear explosion happens miles away. The film spends its first 20 minutes establishing comfortable Americana, showing Jane Alexander as a devoted mother managing her family's ordinary life. Or then comes a distant flash, a muffled sound, and that's it. No dramatic explosion footage, no collapsing cities, just the understanding that something catastrophic occurred somewhere off-screen. The real horror unfolds as invisible radiation spreads across the landscape. Characters begin showing symptoms of radiation poisoning without understanding what's happening. Children grow sick, gardens stop producing food, animals die. The protagonist's transformation from capable matriarch to broken survivor is absolutely gut-wrenching. Jane Alexander delivers one of cinema's most psychologically devastating performances, watching her character deteriorate along with society. The film refuses to provide comfort or solutions. There's no military response, no government help, no heroic action sequences. Just the slow realization that everyone is dying and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Critics noted that Testament's approach actually feels more terrifying than explicit depictions of destruction because the audience experiences the helplessness and invisible dread alongside the characters. The film's power comes entirely from restraint and psychological torment rather than visual spectacle. Testament also faced censorship pressure and studio meddling, though less publicly than The Day After. Many film scholars argue it's actually the superior film because it trusts viewers to understand horror without explicitness. Number 14. War Games, 1983. Matthew Broderick plays David Lightman, a brilliant teenage computer hacker who accidentally penetrates the Pentagon's mainframe and initiates a simulated nuclear war scenario that the military computer interprets as reality. Directed by John Badham, War Games operates as a thriller with dark comedic undertones, but its premise terrified actual government officials. The film's central premise emerged from genuine Pentagon fears about computer vulnerability. A UCLA student successfully hacked the Defense Department just weeks after the film's release, validating every concern the movie raised. What makes War Games especially dangerous as propaganda is that it makes nuclear war seem preventable through human ingenuity. Unlike Testament or Threads, this film provides a message that teenagers with computer skills are humanity's last hope against automated systems careening toward apocalypse. The film's climax suggests David can teach the system that nuclear war is unwinnable, that there are no victors, only mutual destruction. Reagan personally screened War Games at Camp David, immediately asking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff whether this scenario could actually happen. The general's response confirmed it was possible, prompting immediate reevaluation of nuclear defense protocols. War Games became so culturally influential that it sparked a massive wave of concern about computer security and hacking threats. The film treats the military-industrial complex as both incompetent and dangerous, a message that resonated across the 1980s counterculture. Remarkably, and despite its provocative content, War Games remained widely distributed and popular, unlike the more suppressed nuclear war films. Perhaps officials realized censoring it would draw more attention to its warnings about cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Number 13. Special Bulletin, 1983. This television movie attempted something incredibly risky. It mimicked breaking news coverage as a nuclear bomb detonates in Charleston, South Carolina. Broadcast as a faux newscast with real television journalists like Christopher Plummer embedded as reporters, Special Bulletin blurred the line between entertainment and emergency alerts so effectively that viewers panicked. The film frames itself as ongoing news coverage rather than drama, using split screens, helicopter footage, and news anchor commentary to create verisimilitude. The target of the nuclear threat is a submarine being decommissioned at Charleston Harbor, with terrorists demanding disarmament or facing detonation. As the scenario escalates, viewers see bombs, explosions, and newscaster reports of devastation in real time. The deception works brilliantly and horrifyingly. Audiences believe they were watching actual news coverage of nuclear attack on American soil. Panic ensued. Switchboards at television stations flooded with calls from terrified citizens. Special Bulletin became infamous for nearly causing a widespread panic similar to Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast decades earlier. The film received awards for its innovative approach, but also faced criticism for being dangerously misleading. Networks became extremely cautious about using fake news formats after Special Bulletin, recognizing how easily such storytelling could destabilize public order. The film's power came entirely from formal presentation rather than dramatic performance. By using authentic television production techniques and news language, it collapsed the psychological distance between fiction and reality in viewers' minds. Number 12. Miracle Mile, 1988. Steve DeJarnette directed this truly bizarre film that begins as a romance between two strangers, Harry and Julie, who meet cute at the La Brea Tar Pits Museum while surrounded by Ice Age fossils. They arrange a date, deeply connecting as new lovers often do. But then Harry receives a mysterious phone call from someone claiming to have inside knowledge of an imminent nuclear attack happening in exactly 60 minutes. The film transforms from romance to thriller as Harry desperately tries to reach Julie while the city descends into panic. What makes Miracle Mile genuinely disturbing is its matter-of-factness. There's no explanation for the warning, no government confirmation, just an ordinary man's escalating realization that the world might be ending and his new girlfriend is trapped across the city. The film uses Los Angeles at night, empty streets, and confused crowds to create existential dread. It explores how people react when confronted with certain death, showing both nobility and desperate selfishness. The ending is deliberately ambiguous and troubling. We never learn if the threat was real or if Harry and Julie survive. The film simply leaves viewers uncertain about whether they just watched a couple's final hours together. Miracle Mile represents a different subgenre of 1980s nuclear cinema, apocalyptic thriller rather than documentary realism or direct disaster depiction. The romance angle makes the stakes feel personal and intimate rather than geopolitical. That shift in perspective proved powerful with audiences, making nuclear war feel like it could happen to anyone, not just populations in distant war zones. Number 11. Red Dawn, 1984. John Milius directed this jingoistic action film depicting a Soviet invasion of the American heartland. High school students become guerrilla fighters resisting communist occupation of their Colorado town. Red Dawn arrives as pure propaganda, yet it captured genuine American Cold War anxieties perfectly. The Soviet Union immediately condemned the film as warmongering nonsense. Here, critics argued it glorified teenage combat and presented Soviet forces as unstoppable unless Americans embraced militant resistance. Red Dawn became controversial for depicting World War III not as nuclear holocaust, but as conventional ground invasion followed by brutal occupation. The film suggests America could be conquered and territory controlled by Soviet forces. This scenario contradicted official military doctrine, which promised nuclear deterrence would prevent invasion. Red Dawn implies nuclear war might be avoided through conventional conflict instead, a dystopian but somehow less catastrophic vision. What makes Red Dawn different from other 1980s films is its celebration of violence and warfare. Whereas Testament and Threads present nuclear conflict as pure horror, Red Dawn presents resistance as heroic and necessary. The film became wildly popular despite critical dismissal, suggesting audiences wanted stories of human agency and victory rather than helpless doom. Patrick Swayze and C. Thomas Howell became action heroes rather than victims. Red Dawn's influence on action cinema proved massive, spawning countless imitations featuring teenage protagonists fighting invaders. Number 10. The Hunt for Red October, 1990. Released just as the Soviet Union began collapsing, John McTiernan's submarine thriller captured the tail end of Cold War paranoia. Sean Connery plays a Soviet submarine commander defecting to America while American forces pursue him, unsure of his intentions. The Hunt for Red October transforms nuclear deterrence into a cat-and-mouse game between intelligent commanders who respect each other professionally despite political opposition. The film suggests that individual morality transcends Cold War ideology, that honorable people exist on both sides. While technically made in 1990, it represents 1980s anxieties about nuclear submarines, maintaining constant vigilance, with mutually assured destruction balanced on technical precision and human judgment. The film portrays nuclear war as possible only through miscommunication or technical failure rather than intentional escalation. Commanders can prevent catastrophe through cooperation and intelligence. Unlike earlier 1980s films suggesting doom was inevitable, The Hunt for Red October offers a vision situation where wisdom and professional competence prevent Armageddon. The film became incredibly popular, suggesting audiences responded positively to narratives where nuclear war could be avoided through human virtue. The submarine setting emphasizes how nuclear weapons created mutual vulnerability, forcing adversaries into reluctant partnership. Number 9. By Dawn's Early Light, 1990. This made-for-television film arrived as an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's post-nuclear noir story, directed by Jack Shoulder. A truck driver and a female reporter traverse the irradiated American landscape days after nuclear war, discovering that survival means navigating not just environmental devastation, but also human predation and governmental collapse. The film presents nuclear war's aftermath not as action-adventure, but as existential nightmare where comfort, safety, and law cease existing. Characters confront radiation sickness, starvation, and the complete breakdown of civilized behavior. Unlike films focusing on the moment of destruction, By Dawn's Early Light emphasizes the tedious misery of survival. The landscape is gray and desolate. Water is contaminated. Food is scarce. Other survivors are desperate and dangerous. The protagonist couple's attempts to help others repeatedly result in betrayal and violence. The film suggests that human morality collapses faster than physical infrastructure after nuclear war. People revert to primal survival instinct, abandoning cooperation. By Dawn's Early Light never received wide distribution, remaining relatively obscure despite its technical excellence and thematic depth. HBO's limited reach during the early 1990s meant many viewers never encountered this film. The movie's bleakness apparently discouraged marketing efforts, yet critics who've seen it argue By Dawn's Early Light presents the most realistic vision of post-nuclear survival ever filmed, eschewing both the action-adventure elements of Red Dawn and the melodrama of Testament for uncompromising devastation. Number 8. Letters from a Dead Man, 1986. Also titled Dead Man's Letters, this Russian film emerged during Gorbachev's era of openness, representing Soviet cinema's own confrontation with nuclear apocalypse. Director Konstantin Lopushansky created a film showing life in a bunker after nuclear war, here with a father attempting to protect his son in underground caverns. Letters from a Dead Man deliberately contrast with Western nuclear cinema by presenting the Soviet perspective on nuclear catastrophe. Rather than American suburban life disrupted, the film shows Eastern European urban collapse and desperate survival in bunkers. The cinematography is deliberately bleak and desaturated, emphasizing the grayness of underground existence. Characters slowly lose hope as they realize the outside world has become completely uninhabitable. The father's attempts to maintain his son's innocence and humanity amid total devastation create heartbreaking sequences. Lopushansky's direction emphasizes psychological deterioration alongside physical degradation. Characters develop delusions and lose cognitive function due to isolation and desperation. The film suggests that radiation and starvation are not the primary killers after nuclear war, but psychological disintegration. Many film scholars argue Letters from a Dead Man is the most devastating of the 1980s nuclear films, presenting hopelessness more completely than Western equivalents. The film rarely appears in Western film surveys because its Soviet production and limited distribution kept it obscure. Yet viewers who've encountered it consistently report it as the most disturbing nuclear cinema ever made. Number 7. One Night Stand, 1984. Australian filmmaker John Dugan created a film based on the curious notion that Australia might survive nuclear war between superpowers. Four young protagonists attempt to shelter in the Sydney Opera House during nuclear attack, believing Australia's isolation might protect it. The film gradually reveals that this assumption is delusional. Australia will not be spared from atmospheric radiation effects or nuclear winter. No geographic location offers safety. One Night Stand's power comes from establishing false hope before systematically dismantling it. Characters share memories and have heartfelt conversations while waiting for the missiles, creating intimacy before devastation arrives. The bombing sequences show Sydney consumed in fire. Then survivors find themselves in subway tunnels with hundreds of desperate refugees. The film's focus on crowded underground spaces emphasizes that nuclear war offers no escape, no sanctuary. Population centers cannot accommodate survivors. Resources cannot support those seeking shelter. One Night Stand never achieved wide distribution outside Australia, remaining relatively unknown internationally. The film's deliberate pacing and emphasis on conversation rather than action apparently limited its appeal to mainstream audiences, yet critics recognized its realistic depiction of urban nuclear war and the futility of seeking safety through geographic isolation. One Night Stand deserves much greater recognition as serious nuclear cinema comparable to Testament and Threads. Number 6. Silkwood, 1983. Mike Nichols directed this drama about Karen Silkwood, a real plutonium plant worker who became contaminated and later died under mysterious circumstances. Meryl Streep delivers a career-defining performance as Silkwood, a woman discovering that the nuclear industry routinely exposed workers to lethal radiation without proper safety protocols. Silkwood operates less as traditional nuclear war cinema and more as corporate whistleblower thriller, but its implications are profoundly disturbing. The film suggests that nuclear weapons production itself was a form of slow-motion warfare against civilian workers. Radiation contamination occurred not through dramatic missile strikes, but through negligent industrial practices. Silkwood's investigation into safety violations reveals that people working in nuclear facilities were essentially considered expendable by government and corporate entities. The film asks uncomfortable questions about who bears the true cost of nuclear deterrence. Not politicians or generals, but ordinary workers whose bodies became toxic waste. Meryl Streep's transformation from confident worker to terrified victim as radiation sickness progresses creates empathetic horror. The mysterious car accident that kills Silkwood before she can deliver evidence to a journalist adds conspiratorial dread. Was her death accidental or assassination to prevent her testimony? The film refuses to answer, implying that government agencies might suppress information about nuclear industry dangers. Silkwood became one of 1983's most acclaimed films, suggesting audiences were ready to confront uncomfortable truths about nuclear establishment malfeasance. Number 5. The Manhattan Project, 1986. Marshall Brickman directed this thriller about Paul Stevens, a brilliant teenage physicist who builds an atomic bomb to expose security failures in American nuclear facilities. The Manhattan Project mirrors war games in suggesting that American teenagers could wield nuclear weapons and force adults to confront their incompetence. Paul constructs a functional bomb from stolen plutonium, intending to demonstrate how easily terrorists could acquire materials for weapons. The film positions the protagonist as simultaneously heroic and dangerously naive. His actions expose security vulnerabilities, but also bring him close to creating an actual nuclear incident. The Manhattan Project questions whether brilliant individuals should be trusted with weapons technology, especially when motivated by idealism rather than military discipline. Critics noted that the Manhattan Project presented a dystopian vision of American security infrastructure where teenagers could essentially achieve what intelligence agencies supposedly work to prevent. The film suggests that technological advancement had outpaced governmental capacity to regulate or control it. The emphasis on young protagonists in 1980s nuclear films repeatedly suggested that only new generations unburdened by Cold War ideology could solve weapons problems. Number 4. Crimson Tide, 1995. Arriving just as the Soviet Union collapsed, Tony Scott's submarine thriller presents a post-Cold War nightmare where Russian ultranationalists seize control of nuclear missiles. Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman play submarine officers disagreeing about whether to launch missiles at Russian targets. Crimson Tide represents anxiety that nuclear weapons could escape Soviet control, becoming tools of unpredictable extremists. The film suggests Cold War bipolarity actually provided stability. With superpowers theoretically rational actors respecting mutual destruction, nuclear war remained unlikely. But with Soviet institutions collapsing and weapons potentially sold to rogue actors, unpredictability increased catastrophe risk. Crimson Tide portrays nuclear conflict as possible not through calculated decision, but through miscommunication and technical failure. The submarine's communication systems receive contradictory orders, forcing the commanding officer and executive officer into fundamental disagreement about protocols. The film argues that at nuclear weapons core, individual judgment and honor matter more than institutional procedures or technical safeguards. Crimson Tide's popularity suggested audiences accepted that nuclear threats persisted despite Cold War's end. Number 3. Fat Man and Little Boy, 1989. Roland Joffé directed this historical drama about the Manhattan Project, depicting the scientists who developed the first atomic bombs. Fat Man and Little Boy explores the moral ambiguity of creating weapons of unimaginable destructive capacity. Robert Oppenheimer, played by Christopher Walken, grapples with the knowledge that his creation could devastate entire civilizations. The film presents nuclear weapons as inevitably consequential to scientific progress. Once theoretical physics matured, once nuclear fission became understood, weapons development followed as natural extension. Fat Man and Little Boy suggests that controlling nuclear technology proved impossible because the scientific knowledge itself contained the bomb's potential. Fat Man and Little Boy provides historical context for 1980s 1980s Nuclear Anxieties, connecting contemporary weapons to the Manhattan Project's founding moment. The film asks whether scientists bear moral responsibility for weapons applications of their discoveries. Oppenheimer's later opposition to nuclear proliferation appeared in the film as tortured conscience confronting the implications of his creation. Fat Man and Little Boy connect scientific advancement to moral catastrophe, suggesting that intelligence and capability don't necessarily confer wisdom. Number 2. The China Syndrome. 1979. Technically, from 1979, this thriller arrived during the rising wave of nuclear cinema and profoundly influenced 1980s nuclear films. Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon portray a television news reporter and nuclear engineer discovering that a major power plant barely prevented total meltdown. The film's title references the darkly humorous notion that if a reactor melted completely, theoretically the molten core would burn through the Earth to China. The China Syndrome proved especially controversial because its fictionalized meltdown scenario occurred just weeks before the real 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster, lending the film terrifying credibility. Audiences and government officials panicked, wondering if Hollywood had somehow predicted the disaster or whether it was inevitable given the industry's negligence. The film crystallizes anxieties about nuclear technology existing in civilian contexts beyond military control. Power plants theoretically operated for peaceful purposes, yet catastrophic failure could devastate surrounding regions. The China Syndrome presented nuclear energy itself as inherently dangerous, not just nuclear weapons. The film sparked national debate about nuclear power plant safety and government regulation. It demonstrated cinema's power to influence public perception of technological risk. The China Syndrome directly preceded the wave of 1980s nuclear war films by establishing that nuclear catastrophe wasn't abstract or theoretical, but entirely possible. Number 1. Come and See, 1985. While technically a World War II film, Ilya Klimov's Come and See emerged during the Cold War era and became one of cinema's most psychologically devastating works about warfare and nuclear-era atrocity. Come and See follows a young partisan fighter witnessing Nazi atrocities in Belarus, progressively deteriorating psychologically as he confronts humanity's capacity for systematic destruction. Director Klimov presents warfare not through action sequences, but through extended documentation of suffering, violence, and civilian devastation. The film's most famous sequence, depicting the massacre of a village, stretches unbearably as soldiers systematically execute civilians. Klimov refuses to cut away, forcing viewers to witness unfiltered brutality. Come and See arrives with prophetic relevance to nuclear-age cinema because it suggests that even conventional warfare destroys the human soul completely. If traditional combat could devastate survivors so thoroughly, nuclear war's effects would be unimaginably worse. Come and See influenced all subsequent 1980s and 1990s nuclear films by establishing that realism was mandatory, that audiences deserved unflinching depictions of catastrophe. Audiences repeatedly report Come and See as the most disturbing film ever made. The experience is so traumatizing that many viewers cannot complete the film. Yet this extreme power makes it essential viewing for understanding 20th century warfare, nuclear threats, and human capacity for destruction. These films haunted a generation living under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. They predicted that World War III would not be glorious but devastatingly mundane. They showed ordinary people confronting extraordinary horror with no possibility of victory. The most shocking part, almost every prediction these films made about nuclear war's effects proved scientifically accurate. Modern weapons are even more destructive than 1980s films imagined. So here's my question for you. In our current moment, with global tensions rising again, why have we stopped making these cautionary films? Are we less afraid of nuclear war because governments tell us not to be? Or do we genuinely believe it could never happen again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which of these banned films terrified you most. And be prepared for the debate that follows because, frankly, we need to start confronting these scenarios honestly before it's too late.